Welcome to the third episode of Teaching in a Digital World. Tonight's topic is on student engagement. We're going to go ahead and give everybody just a few extra minutes to get logged in. It is only 7:01, just in case some people are running behind. But while we're waiting, please, if you haven't already done so, introduce yourself in the chat box. Think of some questions you may want to ask or questions you're hoping the session will answer. We should have time at the end for you to also ask questions. And then you can also have a copy of this slide deck with that bit.ly link on the screen. So we're also going to go over some housekeeping details. First, I want to thank you for taking your time to join us tonight. I know a lot of you have started teaching, whether that's virtually or in person or hybrid, and taking a Tuesday evening out of your time. We really appreciate that. My name is Jennifer Watson. I am the Senior Digital Learning Specialist at the IDOE. I also have some of our wonderful teaching and learning team members here tonight. We have Dr. Jennifer Jensen, Emily Bruning, Kelly Waller, Mary Carnahan, and Shannon Dick, who are helping tonight as well. So as we get started, we wanted to remind you of a few housekeeping details. Please keep yourself on mute. We are recording this webinar and we will release the recording as soon as possible. Also, please keep your camera off to preserve bandwidth. This is going to help it a better experience for everybody, even though we would love to see your faces. Too many people can actually slow this down. So also, again, introduce yourself in the chat, ask questions, make comments, connect with other participants, and we'll make note of any frequently asked questions to make sure that we can get those answered for you tonight as well. Okay, so it is 7:04. I'm going to go ahead, and so we don't waste any time, be respectful of your all's time tonight, because we appreciate this. We do want to go over our mission, and that is to support you guys, to support educators in developing the competencies necessary to provide Indiana students with high quality digital learning experiences, both in person and virtually. So our purpose tonight for this webinar, as teachers, we know student engagement in a brick and mortar environment is challenging. When we are tasked with keeping student engagement in a digital environment, it brings its own set of challenges. So tonight, our purpose is to understand how to increase student engagement and demonstrate instructional strategies for an online and offline environment. In addition, we want to provide you with creative and effective ways technology can be used to increase engagement. So first, I would like to welcome Emily Bruning, our elementary math and science specialist. She is going to go over what student engagement is and how to use some of these exciting tools.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm so glad that I'm here tonight with you guys. Thank you to the digital learning team for having me. All right. So I want to talk a little bit about student engagement. Some of the struggles that teachers have been facing when shifting to remote or virtual learning in terms of student engagement have been things like teaching hands-on tasks virtually, maintaining personal interactions with students, building those relationships virtually, and then also fostering collaboration and creativity virtually. So creating those experiences for students was really difficult this spring as we were all crisis teaching, reacting to the pandemic in the best way we knew how. So now it is more or less an expectation that we continually prepare for this situation so that every educator, they need to consider how to create these opportunities moving forward. So I want you to use the chat box right now and just type your answer to this question. How many of you would say digital learning in any capacity is an integral part of your school or district? Just type in the chat. I see, yep, yes. No, not really. Absolutely. Yes, yes. Okay, so In a 2020 Schoology survey of more than 16,000 educators, 62% agreed that digital learning was an integral part to their schools' teaching and learning plan. So I feel like our chat might be a little off of that average. It looks like it is an integral part to a lot of your teaching and learning plans for your school. But 62% of those 16,000 educators did say that it is integral, and I would agree with that. And I think our digital learning team would also agree that more now it is becoming such an integral part to teaching and learning in our schools. So the work of Phil Schlechtley, he loosely defines student engagement by these three characteristics. Students are attracted to their work, they persist in their work despite challenges and obstacles, and they take visible delight in accomplishing their work. So this involves getting students moving, thinking, interacting with others, and others as in not just their classmates, creating and making choices and decisions. And there is a difference between compliance and engagement. Engaged students will participate mentally and emotionally in the tasks that you're presenting to them, but we need to make sure that those tasks are relevant, meaningful, and drawing on students' intellectual interest. I'm sure you've all experienced these student engagement characteristics in your students. So now let's talk a little bit about how we can translate this to a remote learning environment and then sustain it for our students. So what if you asked your students if they agreed with this statement? My teacher makes me feel my work is important, or I have the opportunity to do what I do best every day. How would your students respond? These are the questions we need to continually consider as we're thinking of student engagement. So from the work of Strong, Silver, and Robinson, student engagement is driven by 4 goals, and each goal satisfies a specific human need. Success drives mastery. So using success criteria with clear, immediate feedback will help achieve this goal. So the frameworks on the IDOE website can really help you articulate the success criteria for each standard. Modeling the skills students need to be successful will also provide your students with an opportunity to succeed. So skills are often assumed, but we know our students come to us at all different levels, and we need to differentiate. So using the looking back and looking ahead sections of the frameworks will help you identify appropriate skills based on student needs. So to achieve the clarity that I've been describing, it's also important to provide exemplars to students by students so that they can better understand their ability to achieve the task that you're asking of them. And then curiosity drives understanding. An educator that I admire named Dan Meyer tells us as teachers, we need to be less helpful. But what does that really mean? It means allowing students to generate their own questions. It means giving students time to think about the information they need to complete a task. It means allowing students to act on their natural curiosities and notice and wonder about the task and how it connects to their world. It is allowing students to think before you think for them. And then originality cultivates self-expression. Self-expression is often a discouraged skill in teaching and learning because it lacks a sense of seriousness. So how can we make self-expression meaningful in our instructional practice? Connecting projects to students' personal ideas and concerns in their lives. Give students choice. Honor students' learning styles, intelligences, and cultural diversity. Finally, relationships foster collaboration and connection to peers and others. Our best work is done when we have a good relationship with the people involved. Consider having students work collaboratively on a project. Students will need each other's knowledge to complete the project. This works best when students' skills are diverse. Take the beginning of the year to learn about your students so you have a good starting place creating successful groupings. I've got a virtual activity coming up to share with you that will work great for this goal. These 4 goals are intrinsically motivating to students. Students feel a natural motivation to reach these goals with no external reward. To create lessons that tap into these naturally motivating goals, teachers should strive to connect content to issues students are facing outside of the classroom. In a white paper I read on student engagement that I've linked in the notes of this slide deck, Pearson suggests a substantial body of research shows student-centered active learning strategies increase student learning and achievement, in turn improving student academic performance, increasing engagement, critical thinking, and cultivating better attitudes towards learning. Regardless of the delivery method, academic engagement is paramount for student success. Skinner, Kinderman, and Furrer defined academic engagement as the quality of students' participation or connections with the schooling endeavor, and hence with activities, values, people, goals, and places that comprise it. Notice that the 4 goals of student engagement that I just mentioned can be intertwined with these characteristics of academic engagement. We have to remember the human element of engagement and make sure it is connected to our standards. Best practice for academic engagement should mimic the in-person experience in terms of curriculum and resources aligned to the Indiana academic standards to ensure students are being challenged through rigorous and relevant learning. This can be accomplished not solely through screen time and worksheets. There will be on-site and off-site learning this academic school year. Both contexts should include the same amount of instructional time, and schools should provide guidance for staff and families about the kinds of participation and academic engagement to reach minimum time thresholds in the off-site learning context. It is recommended schools augment their attendance policies to provide families with clarity about expectations for participation and academic engagement in that off-site context. If you'd like to read the full memo on academic engagement from IDOE, I've linked it in the notes of this slide deck. IDOE has worked very hard to provide a variety of resources to help teachers coordinate, direct, and facilitate academic engagement. I've linked the resources in the notes section of the slide deck, but I'll give you a little idea about each one. So continuous learning weekly challenges are weekly choice boards specifically designed without technology in mind. Healthy Hoosier challenges are physical challenges to promote student well-being while at home. The Family Engagement Toolkit is a list of free resources offered by state and federal agencies, private companies, and nonprofit organizations to help families. A resource database, which provides grade level and content area resources for educators. Remote learning resource webpage that includes resources for special student groups, supports for educators, and general resources for families. And finally, the TV and movie engagement templates. They're meant to provide an opportunity for students to learn and grow while watching a TV show or movie. And they're available in both Spanish and English for elementary and secondary students. Desmos is a free suite of math software tools that powers free digital classroom activities designed by teachers for teachers. These activities help students explore concepts more deeply, collaborate with peers on problem solving, and encourages creativity. Each of those that I just mentioned can be tied back to those goals I mentioned previously. Desmos is always creating things for educators. The most recent development is starter screens. I'm going to share screens for checking in and getting to know each other. The screens for check-in are great for any educator to help you check in with your students and see how they're feeling. The Getting to Know Each Other activity is a great starter pack of engaging questions to help you and your students get to know each other. So if you would, please go to student.desmos.com and type in 3A767U to experience what the student would experience. You will notice that you can sign in with or without Google or continue without signing in. For today's purpose, it does not matter how you sign in, but with your students, if you are a Google school, I would recommend having students sign in with Google so the work is saved for future use and login will be automatic rather than signing in every single time. So I'm going to show you on the screen what the teacher sees. But if you haven't logged in, go ahead and log in on the screen. If I could have one of my team members just type that student.desmos.com and the code in the chat box, because I'm going to navigate away from this screen so that people can see the teacher screen, just in case they didn't get logged in. All right, so I see some of us are already in there working hard. Okay, so this is what the teacher would see. At the top, you can see student. So this is what the student is seeing. So this is what you should be seeing right now as you're working. I can see that there are 6 participants in this first box working, and there's 1 participant in this box too. And you can see it's changing as students are working. So you can see the progress there. I'm going to go back to the teacher. I was on the summary. So I started here in the summary where I can see all of my students, or you as participants, are working. You can see the blue box is the active box where the student is working. The dot shows they are completed with that activity and to move on. On this, the one I'm showing you right now, the first 7 screens are the screens for check-in. And then the screens 9 through 19 are the getting to know each other screens. I've just combined them for ease of access for this demonstration. But like everything in Desmos, it is completely customizable. You can add, copy, paste, delete, move, edit all screens and components. So I just want to go to this teacher section really quickly so you can see so this is like a overall snapshot of everyone, so you can see what the students are doing. So I can see here that Christine is not doing very well right now, so I might want to go to her and kind of check in with her and see what's going on. You can also see the written response if they added one. You can also make this anonymous. So at the top where it says anonymize, I can click that. So if this was on your computer screen or you wanted other students to see it for some reason, you could make it anonymous so other students or other people would not be able to see who is responding. So as you work through the screens, you can really just see, I'm not going to go through each one of these screens, but you can see how different they are and how each one provides a different purpose that you might be looking for to either check in with the student to see how they're feeling, or the 9 through 19 to get to know your students better and build those relationships. All right, so I'm going to go back now. You guys can keep on going. If you like what you're doing and hang out in Desmos, that's completely fine. But I am going to go back to my presentation now so I can tell you a little bit about how this is not only a math resource, because I know some of you might be wondering, well, I'm not a math teacher. And other ways that you might be able to use this. Of course, any teacher can use the student engagement, checking in slides, and the getting to know each other slides. Those are very broad for any group of students. And again, they are all customizable, so you can bring them down and up for your grade level to be age appropriate for your students. So being completely transparent, if you know about Desmos or know other teachers that use Desmos, if you navigate to Desmos, it will be completely apparent that this is a secondary math resource, but please don't be fooled. As a former elementary school teacher, this resource is useful to elementary teachers too, and I'm going to tell you how. English language arts teachers, same to you. This is not solely a math resource, even though it is marketed as such. I could spend a whole hour just on Desmos, but I don't have that time right now. So I have linked in the notes resources from English language arts educators who use Desmos, but I am going to touch on it a little bit so you can see. I've also shared in the notes section of this slide deck the resources that will help you get started with Desmos, including the screens I shared with you today. So you can just have the screens and go right into it, either edit them or use them as is. So you will have access to that. Okay, so here are some examples of using Desmos outside of a math or secondary context. An elementary teacher uses Desmos by uploading a picture of a book page to label syllables. This teacher used match cards that they could match to rhyme. A kindergarten teacher uploaded an image of handwriting practice to have students trace on their iPads. They could practice writing letters. And then also a teacher uploaded these images, and the students were to circle images that start with the beginning sound. A secondary ELA teacher created an activity to allow students to work through potential symbols from The Great Gatsby and work collaboratively with this. So any teacher can create anything in the Desmos Activity Builder, so please consider exploring this resource for an engaging way for your students to interact with content as you plan your lessons both in person and virtually. So my time is almost up, and I'd like to leave you with this. Please consider exploring a new digital tool like Desmos or one of the many resources and ideas that my colleagues will share with you in this presentation tonight, or implement a new instructional strategy, or share an idea you learned from today's webinar with a colleague to continue the conversation. We have to do this work together. Now I'm going to pass it over to Kelly Waller to discuss student engagement with text.
All right, thanks Emily so much for that introduction. And I love that resource that you just shared. As an ELA teacher, I would love to get in there and just kind of like figure out what would work best and just kind of play around with it. So that's a great resource. I appreciate you sharing that. So as Emily shared, my name is Kelly Waller, and I am the secondary ELA and literacy specialist here at the DOE. So I'm going to share with you some things to keep in mind when choosing engaging text for students to read, and then a few activities that you can do following the reading. These strategies can be used across multiple grade levels and can go beyond the English language arts classroom. So now it is more important than ever to choose texts that are going to engage students. The days of just choosing a random article or a story to use to supplement a lesson are over. And remote learning really demands that we create opportunities for students to want to actually start and finish a piece of reading rather than just kind of pretending to read because their teacher is watching over them. So I have provided a few suggestions to take into consideration when choosing a text. First, when you choose a text, whether it's a novel or a poem or a nonfiction article, it must be of an appropriate reading level. Students are not going to have the same level of support to engage with the text like they would if they were in the classroom and able to immediately ask the teacher questions. So the first thing to consider is the length of the reading. Truly evaluate how long a text is going to take a student to read, and be generous on that guess on what your average student will need to complete it. Then think about how much instructional time you really have for that class, and make sure that it's reasonable that a student will be able to read it in that amount of time. If not, always consider breaking the text into smaller chunks so that students can focus on more manageable sections before they would begin to lose interest or motivation. After considering the length, next you want to consider the background knowledge that a student would need to be able to make connections to a text. Does it take place in a country they've never heard of? Does the text discuss a religion they don't know anything about? Make sure that you provide any resources a student may need to fill in these gaps. It may take an extra day of instruction to help students build that background knowledge, but you must provide it if they're going to be able to access the content. So to do this, you may want to show a video, provide images, or facilitate a discussion so that a student's first exposure to that new information is not when they're reading it independently at home. Next, read through the reading and pick out any vocabulary words that students may not know. If students struggle with more than 10% of the words in a text, they will not have the ability to access the information yet. It is your responsibility to prevent this by providing definitions to the words that they'll need to know. Words you should choose should be essential to understanding the text, and they should be common words that they will encounter again and again throughout the lesson or the unit that you're teaching. You can do this by having students look up the definitions on their own, or you can provide the definitions to them. So after you've taken the steps to ensure that you have provided an appropriate piece of reading for the level of your students, you then need to determine if the texts are going to be engaging enough to keep them interested. First thing you want to do is evaluate the characters, then look at the setting, and then the conflict, and determine if this is something that students would want to read about. When thinking about characters, consider if your students will be able to relate to the main character by race or age, gender, socioeconomic status, religion, etc. Students should be able to have at least one connection with the main character. Next is the setting of places they can relate to. Can they picture it in their mind? Do they know what it's like to live on a farm, or can they relate to 18th century England without your support? If you know that students are going to struggle with the setting, consider choosing a text that will provide the same literary wealth, but in a setting that's more relatable. And lastly, is the conflict of the story one that students will be interested in the resolution? Does the main character learn some type of lesson from which students can also benefit? These are all key details to consider when making sure that you choose a text that students can engage with. This may mean pushing back against the classics we often find in our schools. I encourage you to be open-minded when choosing texts and to realize that modern literature has a plethora of options that can help you teach the standards at any grade level. Taking all of these details into account when choosing a text is essential to building student engagement. There is a time and a place for reading the text that might not meet this criteria, but when students are learning in a remote environment and when they will have to utilize more internal motivation than ever before, making sure that you're taking the extra time to choose the best text possible is only going to result in higher student engagement and in turn, better progress and student growth. So after we've chosen the perfect text, you then have to decide what you're going to have your students do with it. How are they going to interact with that text? So on this slide, you can see 3 different strategies that you can use to ask students to engage with the text in an online environment. The first tool on the left is going to ask students to use technology to create what's called BookSnap. Students are asked to take a picture of a page or passage of a text that stands out to them. This can be a passage that addresses a prompt or a question that the teacher has provided, or you can just ask students to find a moment of connection to the text. After they take the picture, they can edit and decorate it to help reflect their thoughts or their feelings about the text. In this example here, you can see that the user typed a quotation from Catcher in the Rye in the banner. Then they used a Bitmoji that communicates their reaction to the passage, and they use the word lies in a bold and aggressive design, all to communicate their understanding of what was said. This is a great opportunity to allow students to utilize technology that they already readily use, but in a way that's educational and a great check for understanding for the teacher. Students will be engaged in allowing their creativity to shine through. In the middle box, there are suggestions for using a tool called Flipgrid. Flipgrid is a platform that allows students to take a video of themselves. The teacher can create a link for students to follow that will allow all of the recordings for a specific activity to be located in the same place for the teacher to be able to access easily. Students will be able to see the responses of their peers. And for Flipgrid, the teacher can pose a question they would like for students to answer, like make a prediction about what will happen next in the text, or provide an example of figurative language used by the author and explain the significance of the overall tone. You can adjust the rigor of the activity based on what you ask the students to do. And this allows students to practice skills that are included not only in their reading literature or reading nonfiction standards, but also in their speaking and listening standards for English language arts. The last one we're going to look at is utilizing an online discussion board. This may look different depending on the platform that your school uses. The teacher can post a question or an ask of students, and students reply or post an answer to respond to the board. Students are able to write just a short one-word response, or they can write a multiple paragraph response depending on what the teacher is looking for. The teacher can also adjust the settings to determine if students can reply and interact with one another. Whenever I use discussion boards in my classroom, I always would require students to post their own response and then to reply to a specific number of their peers, say 2. And this builds class community and engagement. Now, after going through all of these, I'd like to briefly hear from all of you in the chat. Of these 3 digital tools, which one do you think you would be most likely to utilize with your students? Yep, a lot of Flipgrid. I know a lot of teachers are probably familiar with Flipgrid already, so that's great. I love Booksmap. I think it really creates an opportunity for creativity and engagement and for students to kind of have fun. Absolutely. And you can look up any of these tools on YouTube to find videos on how to use them. Yeah, I mean, discussions can definitely be dangerous as you're giving kind of students that opportunity to, I guess, say whatever they want. But I think, you know, as long as you've really built a good classroom culture and set expectations, and then obviously as you're monitoring it, you can always restrict students who can't quite handle the freedom that the discussion board allows for. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for listening to my strategies for choosing engaging text. Again, all of these strategies can be used across all grades and disciplines. I don't want anyone to think that only teachers of English language arts should be asking students to read and respond to text during this time. What we've discussed for choosing engaging text and the strategies to help students demonstrate their understanding can be utilized with novels, news articles, or even a video. So I encourage people to get out there and experiment with these different strategies.
Thank you so much, Kelly and Emily. Really appreciate those strategies and resources that we can use. We are now going to send it over to Dr. Jensen.
Sure. As we get started, set up here, I wanted to answer a question that was put in the chat. And Christine asked about the instructional time and academic engagement. And the question is, should we expect 5 hours of academic engagement for elementary virtual learners? And the answer is yes. 5 hours for elementary learners, 6 hours for secondary learners. A mixture of synchronous and asynchronous is completely acceptable. The other thing I want you to hear me say is that it's also acceptable that the 5 or 6 hours is not all in front of a computer. So please refer to the guidance documents that Emily referenced earlier, and they are linked on an earlier slide about academic engagement and instructional time. Those are very key and point out some great ways that you can engage students asynchronously while not in front of a computer. So we think that's really important, not just for our younger learners, but honestly, probably for all of our learners. I think as adults, I've certainly learned over the last 6 months or so that sitting in front of a computer all day on video is actually very exhausting. So if you do have more questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. We're going to talk about camera usage here for a minute. And so as you're thinking about student engagement in a digital world where, and I'm not talking about digital necessarily when they're sitting in your class, but where students specifically are learning virtually, I really want you to think twice about policies that require the use of video in virtual class meetings. Dr. Tori Trust, Associate Professor of Learning Technology at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, created the infographic partially pictured here. And we've got the full graphic linked in the notes. Dr. Trust says you should not connect the use of video to any part of a student grade, including extra credit. Also, you should never remove a student from class because they are not using video, nor should you trick students to turn on the video by, say, having a class dance party or some other kind of ruse. Rather, give students choice, allowing them to use blurred backgrounds or filters. Also do real-time check-ins, asking frequent questions. Think about how we had some of you respond in the chat over the course of this webinar. Students can respond in the chat or use various digital tools and utilize digital assessment tools regularly. And I really mean formative assessment tools there. And we're going to talk some more about some of those in our webinar next week as we're looking at checking for understanding. So I am well aware that many of you may be working in districts that are making the use of video a requirement. We have definitely heard this coming repeatedly at the department. It's the easiest way to maybe take attendance sometimes. But I really would encourage you to reconsider this. And I want you to think about why it matters. Dr. Truss cites 4 key reasons that this should matter to us. The first one is privacy. Students may not be comfortable sharing their personal space with everyone in the classroom. And we really need to be sensitive to this as teachers. When they show up in our physical schools, they are separate from their home life. But when you are requiring them to show up on camera, you are forcing yourself and all of the other students that might be on that Zoom meeting into their personal homes. Is that really going to be comfortable? I know there are certainly days in my own home when I do not want to show the mess that is going on in the background as you know, kids are playing and things like that. So but that's my own personal thing, and I still think it's okay. But we have students that are coming from all different kinds of walks of life and different spaces, and they will have even less control over their environment than I have over mine. A second thing is safety. Students and possibly family members may not want their image captured or recorded or shared, and that's a danger if you have students on video. So this is especially true if you've had issues with cyberbullying in your school or things like that. I know, again, talking about our own team meetings, we've certainly snapped taking screenshots at different times saying, oh, this is how you froze. And that's all in good fun with our team, but students can sometimes be cruel. So that's something to think about. A third reason would be equity. Just like we asked you to turn off your camera for this meeting to improve the quality, all students are not going to have the same internet bandwidth that would support video. And so if somehow that is connected to their grade, but their video isn't working, that is an issue. So just think about, or they may be trying to watch you on video, but it keeps cutting out. So then their engagement is going to be reduced. So think about that. And then personal, students might feel shy or anxious to be on camera. I've read several blog posts, and I already mentioned it earlier about how much more exhausting it is for adults to engage in Zoom all day. And so I just think about, how does this make our students feel? I'm also thinking here a little bit about younger students. I've seen my own niece try to perform for the camera that she can see herself on, as opposed to thinking about what is actually being said to her. So trust me when I say this, I would definitely rather be seeing the looks on your faces right now. I would love to know that you were tracking with me and that you were hearing what I was saying. I really feel like when I was in the classroom, one of my sort of superpowers as a teacher was the ability to read the faces in the room and to understand when students were getting it and when they saw the looks of confusion or frustration or things like that. And so if you are like me, then you feel out of your element right now. But if we seek ways to engage with students, we can gauge their attentiveness in other ways. So that is really our reality when it comes to virtual learning now. So when students choose not to be on camera, assume the best and ask questions, not necessarily in the meeting, but individually, right? Show your concern. When you had a student that was inattentive in your classroom, perhaps with their head down, did you go ask if they were okay? Did you ignore them, or did you, how did you handle that? I would encourage you to think about handling that in that idea of not being on camera in this same way as well. Being on camera is not a sign of engagement any more than sitting at a desk in your classroom is a sign of engagement. So rather note how they're participating and follow up if you see those virtual check-ins are lacking. So moving to the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can have students engage off camera. And there is a YouTube video that we found on Twitter, and it's linked in this, and it talks about using Jamboard. So there's a number of things I've listed on the screen: Pear Deck, Padlet, Quizzes, Socrative. All those can give you kind of real-time checks for understanding. We'll talk about some of them in the future, but right now I want to show you how you could use Jamboard to engage students. So Jennifer is going to navigate to our Jamboard, and you'll see that if you're not familiar with Jamboard, it's a Google add-on. And it's a whiteboard. It's an interactive whiteboard. So every student can have their picture there, and you might start at the beginning of the day with "where are you?" and all the pictures might be in that one spot. And then if you, as you start to work, the student can check in and drag their picture to where they're at. So they may drag themselves over to their sitting at their learning station. They may need to go to the restroom for a minute. They may be away on family business. So they can check in regularly throughout the day with for you. Another way to look at it, if we go to the next slide, or the next, I think it's called Frame in Jamboard, so I might not be as familiar with it. But if you could do the same thing with like a carpet if you're an elementary school teacher, or even a high school teacher if you wanted to, and have them have a place at the carpet. If you wanted to get tricky, because high school students will be tricky, right? And they'll be like, "Oh, I'm on the B. Can you drag my picture to the B for me?" You could always send an email and randomize like where they're supposed to sit for that day, and then they would have to figure that out. So that's another option. If you take a look at the next option, you could also have students showing that they're doing different things. So they could be in whole group instruction and everybody's picture would be in the same spot. Or you might have some people working independently, some people working with the teacher, and they could rotate in stations that way. So there's a lot of ways that you could utilize that Jamboard feature to help, to have students check in and see where they're at. A couple other things I thought of is you could do a Four Corners activity in the same kind of way. So if you have asked a question and you have you have 4 different answers, and sometimes this is done in a classroom, right, where students physically move to different portions of the room to try to answer their question. You could do this using this Jamboard. You could also ask a "would you rather" question. We love "would you rather" in math, but there's "would you rather" in all kinds of things and on all kinds of subjects. So you could have it just divided into 2, right? And have them drag their picture to which part they agree with. And then you're using, communication and collaboration and argumentation in this way. So if you use some of these things, then you could see that students are engaged without seeing their faces. Although if you can get their pictures like we have with some of our teammates, then you can actually kind of see their faces as well. So I know that we have talked about a lot of tools, and I would encourage you to start small and make sure your students can access them and know how to use them before you add others. Obviously, this really depends on grade level that you're teaching and how you're working with students. But you remember, this will help students and their parents and caregivers. I know that there are places right now that are actually catering to like different daycare centers that are having older students come in and have people there helping with e-learning. And so imagine having 25 kids with 25 different teachers and 1 or 2 people in there trying to make sure that student is getting on the right tool in the right way. So just be mindful of that and think about how you can make sure students really know a tool before you maybe introduce another tool. So, in conclusion, if you will, and we're going to have a time for questions here in a minute, but if we go ahead and move to the very next slide, just keep this in mind. When it comes to student engagement, ultimately, one setting is not better than another. It doesn't matter if students are participating in our classroom or from a distance. Engagement is the key to deeper learning. Students must be attracted to their work, experience a sense of accomplishment upon completion, and be willing to persist despite challenges or obstacles. Because teaching virtually may be new for many of us, engaging our students may seem more difficult from a distance. But truly, if we work to build connections and establish protocols with our students, and we give them high-quality tasks that promote creativity and cultivate curiosity, we can lead them to mastery. So I'm going to turn it back over to Jennifer Watson for kind of our closing and get to our question and answer time.
Thank Thank you, Dr. Jensen. This does wrap up our webinar on student engagement. If you have any additional questions, now is your opportunity as I quickly highlight some of our upcoming events. First, this was our third webinar of a weekly series we have started, Teaching in a Digital World. If you would like to view the last two webinars, our first one we did was on our digital toolkit that we created. And our second one was on student-centered learning, and you can find those recordings. I'm going to drop this in the chat so you can find all those recordings, and you can go to sign up for our upcoming webinars. We have upcoming Check for Understanding next Tuesday at 7 p.m., same time. And then episode 5 is Differentiation, and that will be the following Tuesday at 7 p.m. So hopefully you'll want to sign up for those. And on the screen now, these are the contacts to everyone in our teaching and learning team. So if you think of a specific question, especially on a certain subject, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We have our emails linked and our Twitter handles as well. I just want to thank everybody again for joining us this evening. We are looking forward to continuing giving you as much help as we possibly can. And again, feel free to reach out, hang around, and we can answer some more questions if you want, or you can now hop off and enjoy the rest of your evening. And hopefully we'll be able to see you or have you on, we won't be able to see you personally, but checking for understanding next week. So looking forward to that. Again, thank you so much.